Hello everyone, and welcome to this review of the campaign storylines in Age of Empires 3. Skip to the timestamp at the top of the screen in order to get to the review. I'll be covering a few topics before I get to the review, such as why I'm making this video and how this review will work. If this is information that you wish to know, then keep watching. Okay, let's get started. The reasons why I'm making this video, even though it's not my usual upload. One of the reasons is to get back into the habit of creating videos in the first place. I used to have a bit of an unsustainable routine for creating videos on this channel, and even though it was difficult, it at least forced me to stay in the habit of making videos on a regular basis. However, as life caught up to me, and since I got a job, I've relaxed a bit on my upload schedule. The upside is that I am mentally in a better place when it comes to making videos. The downside is that I almost completely abandoned this channel. Hopefully this video will resuscitate my desire to create content which is enjoyable to watch. The second reason is that news is getting more and more political. This was inevitable, I guess, and politics has its time and place. But I do not consider myself a figure who has sufficient knowledge of rhetoric to be able to participate effectively in the bloodbath that is online debate. I'm unsure if the news cycles will focus less and less on politics, but a recent focus on political events has made it difficult to find a popular story that won't give half the country the middle finger. Sure, I'm heartless when it comes to politics, as calculated and cold as your tax forms, but the market is already saturated with enough political self-professed experts. So throwing my hat into the ring is the equivalent of urinating into the ocean. It won't make things better, or change anything by a large margin. The final reason is practice. Skills of any sort require practice, and it's been a bit too long since I've made a proper video. I'm well aware that Age of Empires 3 isn't the most popular game, and one that isn't really balanced effectively, but I'm not aiming for millions of views. The hope is that this video series will keep my video editing skills up to snuff. Now, how will this review work? The stories of Age of Empires are broken up over a series of acts, or short stories. The first story is a 3-act story, Blood, Ice, and Steel. The second story is a 2-act story, Fire and Shadow. From then on, there are 3 isolated short stories. For this series, there will be 8 videos in total, each covering either an act or a short story. If I feel up to it, I might make one really long version of the review with all 8 parts in one video, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We're just doing this in parts so I don't completely throw in the towel 2/3 into the review. Finally, if I miss any details, whether I made an error in dates or if there was a plot hole I failed to go over, then please feel free to let me know. Now, with all of this out of the way, let's dive into one of the more bizarre fanfictions of history, Blood, Ice, and Steel. We start off with the Ottomans attacking the knights on Malta. Why? The reason for this will be made clear at a later point in this story, but for now, Sahin is going to rant about the Crusades and knighthood. This is all we're going to get for now. And then the mission begins. This review won't be a walkthrough on how to beat the missions, so I'm not going to go into detail about strategies here. Just know that after a while, great bombards show up, which results in Morgan Black lighting a signal to call in cavalry who can actually deal with the cannons. So far, this story seems alright. We've got characters, we've got an inciting incident, and a story is in motion. Next, Sahin is going on a boat with some Ottomans to the New World, and tells Morgan Black that his knighthood will become
irrelevant in the modern world.
Is knighthood ever going to play a significant part in this story? Keep this in mind. We'll come back to this later on. Alain Magnan, the commander, tells Morgan that the Ottomans are holed up in the caves to the east. However, I should point out the fact that Sahin is simply going to ditch the Ottomans who are cornered by the knights, who are more than capable of dispatching Ottoman siege equipment and slaughtering janissaries. Yes, Sahin has enough ships to evacuate everyone, which would help with his objective in the New World. But nope. He just takes a portion of his entire army and leaves the rest to die. Let's move on from this serious strategic oversight. The mission begins, and Morgan and Magnan massacre the remaining Ottomans, explore a cave, and destroy weapon caches. During this mission, one of the explosions from a weapons cache reveals a tunnel, which is apparently what the Ottomans were looking for. They follow the tunnel, and it leads to writing on a wall. Magnan says this writing was left by the Circle of Ossus. When asked about it, Magnan tells Morgan that they are a secret society that seek a way to live forever, and that these writings talk about a lake, located in a place where only the Aztecs know about. Plot spoiler, the lake is the location of the Fountain of Youth. I have questions about this, and we will bring these questions up in the second video. But please, for now, remember that the goal of the Circle of Ossus isn't necessarily the Fountain of Youth, but for a way to achieve eternal life. The Fountain of Youth is the means to an end, not the end itself. Again, we will bring this up in Act 2, in the second video. Let's move on for now. Magnan commands Morgan to beat the Ottomans and to find the Fountain of Youth, stating that their knighthood is at stake. This poses a few interesting questions. Will Morgan's dedication to knighthood weaken as the story progresses? Will the coming battles determine the future of knighthood? We'll get to these questions later on in the review. Now he's sailing, on his way to the New World. Things are peaceful until a fire ship is suddenly spawned by the game and instantly kills one of the escorting ships.
It came out of nowhere!
You're right, it did. Normally, with these calm weather conditions and a lack of fog, a fire ship like this can easily be spotted from a distance. Almost as easy to spot as that large pirate ship. The writers for this story also made this one appear out of thin air.
And there's more where that came from!
This is just stupid. How can these ships in fair weather, in broad daylight, avoid detection until they are roughly 20 feet away? Anyways, Morgan and Elizabeth briefly exchange words before firing on each other. And now, the third mission. Morgan repairs his ship, builds some boats, and gets maps to help himself navigate through the reefs. There is no significant plot development during this mission, but at least he now knows his way around the reefs in the New World. Next, we get a cutscene where Morgan says the New World is dangerous. And right before the next mission begins, we see Sahin, and he finally reveals why he is interested in the Lake of the Moon.
He does not understand. We are not after the Lake of the Moon. We just want to keep it away from the Circle.
Now is as good of a time as any to talk about the Circle. So far, there is only one thing we know about the Circle, and this is their goal: eternal life. And the fountain is the means to accomplish this end. That's it. At this point, we only have one reason to despise the Circle, and that's because the storyteller says so. Later on, we'll have better reasons. In the second and third acts, the Circle performs serious atrocities which warrant a measured response, one consisting of muskets and cannons. However, those events haven't happened quite yet. For the first act, the Circle is run by Magnan, and the only evil thing he does is command Morgan to get some gold from the Spanish treasure fleet. Considering the fact that the Spanish and the Knights of St. John are clashing heads with each other at this point in time, this is an understandable request. One that would allow the Knights to ensure that they have the resources to meet any future threats to their power. And yet we're supposed to believe that they are evil because the writer of this story says they are evil. In short, we're supposed to hate the Circle right now because of lazy writing. Let's get back to the mission. You drive out the Turks, and they are effectively powerless with no resources left.
What of the Turks?
They're beaten. We killed most of the survivors in the jungle, and the Spanish captured the rest.
I'm going to ask you to keep this in mind. The fact that the Turks have been completely defeated in South America. Now, let's focus on the Spanish, who are conquering the Aztecs.
Kill it, please!
Well, before we do that, let's turn our attention towards this animal attack, which is done by an animal that is pure white. This just lets us know that the Circle is in the New World. Morgan's goal has changed: to beat the Circle to the fountain. Fair enough. Now, let's focus on the Spanish, who are conquering the Aztecs. The mission is to defend the Aztec temples. Then, once a big army shows up to fight the Spanish, Morgan and the natives completely crush the Spanish who are laying siege. And then, the big reveal. what the Spanish were after this whole time. Gold, of course. Nah, I'm pulling your leg. They were looking for
The map.
and the Fountain of Youth. How many people from European countries actually know about this Fountain of Youth? Should we still pretend that the fountain is still a secret? Anyways,
The map.
itself is in the middle of where you are fighting, and it indicates that the fountain can be found in Florida. Then we see the Spanish, and though they were defeated, they managed to take a bunch of prisoners and get a glimpse of the map. And Sahin is still alive. Of course he is. In the ensuing cutscene, we get a few things. The motive that this guy has is to become wealthy with waters from the Fountain of Youth. Great stuff. Sahin also gets an opportunity to mention that the Circle of Ossus isn't just an outdated secret society, but one that is still active in a lot of European countries. And even though the Circle of Ossus has managed to amass enough firepower to completely decimate the entire Spanish expedition, Delgado doesn't believe Sahin. Fine. We'll still pretend that this not-so-secret society is still a secret.
Got the Turk in the hold with the other prisoners. He will face the fire when we return to Spain.
Moving on, we get a hurricane, which completely destroys all of Morgan's ships.
Speaking of hurricanes,
Elizabeth shows up and is willing to give Morgan a ride to Florida, but with a few conditions. The first is that he has to impress her. I'm a bit surprised that his skirmishes a few missions back didn't impress her, but fine, whatever. The second is that he fights the Spanish while he makes off with the gold. Fair enough. Will this create any potential conflict which is meaningful to the plot? We'll get to that in just a bit. Just know that Morgan kisses her boots and she agrees to take him and the knights to Florida. We then get a cutscene where Mr. Mag shows up and says he'll prevent the Spanish from reaching the lake. Also, I'm not sure how Elaine also survived the hurricane, but whatever. It just makes this hurricane feel less like a natural event and more like an act of divine intervention from the writers, which was only present to force Morgan to rely on Elizabeth. While I can only speculate on the reasoning behind this writing decision, it is still lazy writing. Alright, back to the story.
what would you have me do?
Take their treasure fleet. We will use their ill-gotten gains to rebuild our knighthood.
So, we now have a conflict of interests, and he decides without any sort of struggle to side with Elaine. How will Elizabeth react to all of this? Will she turn on Morgan, or try to sink the Spanish fleet so nobody gets the gold? Nope. She decides to comply, and her only objection comes from a single line of dialogue. And if it wasn't for the final cutscene, I thought she completely forgot about this betrayal.
Wait just a minute, old man.
Elizabeth, please, let me handle this.
And by handle this, you mean you'll completely go back on your word. Moving on, your mission is to take a bunch of ships from the Spanish and fork it all over to Magnan. Well, at least it can't get any worse. Wait. Why are you still here, Sahin?
So, Sahin, it seems your Spanish friends have left you here to die.
Out of all the prisoners Sahin was locked up with, he was the only one who survived. For those of you who are counting, that's the second time he could have easily been killed. The first time is when Morgan and his army are hunting down Janissaries. He manages to survive that ordeal by getting captured, and now he managed to not get killed in the crossfire of the Spanish troops and Morgan's soldiers. His incompetent leadership is compensated only by his uncanny plot armor. Anyways, Magnet shows up and announces that he has the gold and the lake. When one of the locals warns him not to trifle with the power of the Fountain of Youth, Maggot orders Morgan to kill the Inca prisoner and meet with him at the lake.
Do you see it now, Frank? You have been tricked.
Silence!
Morgan's command for Sahin's silence was a reasonable one, considering how much problems the Ottomans have caused for the knights. But ultimately, Sahin has the superior plot armor, and flexes it by continuing to talk. What? Did you think that Morgan would really execute Sahin? Or demand he be taken away? Of course not. That would make too much sense.
Open your eyes. The Circle of Ossus wants the lake because they think it is the Fountain of Youth. All I have been doing is trying to keep it out of the hands of the Circle. And Elaine Magnet.
This is a bit strange. Putting motive aside, there were plenty of opportunities for him to get in contact with Morgan and let him know about his purpose. When he was shouting at Morgan from the seashore, or when Morgan landed in the New World, he could have met with Morgan with a white flag of truce. But he only reveals this information at this point because it's at this point the story wanted to shock the audience with the information that Elaine leads the circle. Elizabeth chimes in as well, and says that Sahin's story makes sense. After all, while the Spanish and Morgan were engaged in battle, Elaine raced ahead to the lake. Morgan then decides that he will see the lake and judge for himself. Now we're at the second to last cutscene. Don't worry, we're almost done. Morgan realizes that Magma has been using him all along, and because he has betrayed the Knights of St. John, he will do battle with Elaine. Remember when knighthood was brought up again and again in the beginning? How it was going to be
irrelevant in the modern world.
Or at stake? Those were just throwaway lines. They didn't really mean anything. Morgan never has to question his knighthood once, and on top of all of this, knighthood isn't even at stake here. If Elaine wins, then the circle will prevail, which values eternal life way more than it values knighthood. If Morgan wins, who is an advocate for knighthood, it will still die off, and the next cutscene makes this very clear. For the rest of my reviews, I'll try to keep my standards a little bit lower. Now, back to the story. What's the plan?
If you want revenge, keep him from getting his prize, the fountain's water. Destroy it.
Alright, we now have a clear objective, and one of the methods for destroying this fountain is by using fire ships, the ones that are designed to explode. Unfortunately, Elizabeth is low on black powder, so what is the answer to this dilemma? It's Sahin. But out of all the errors this story has made, this is the one I cannot make any excuses for.
I am Ottoman. I have more than you could possibly ever use.
Let's talk about this. Sahin is one of the few Ottomans who is still alive. So where does he get this gunpowder? From his old base? Morgan completely decimated it and routed the Ottomans there. If it came from looting the Spanish, then it couldn't possibly have come from Sahin. Even if Sahin was made entirely out of gunpowder, there is no plausible way that his group could have more than they could ever possibly use. Sahin is just useless to this story. There are other, less plot-contrived ways we could have revealed the fact that Elaine leads the circle, by dropping subtle hints in Elaine's dialogue, and Elizabeth discovering his true colors as a satisfying payoff. But instead, we get this mess. Alright, we've reached the final mission. It's time to destroy the Fountain of Youth. Remember how the plan was initially to get a bunch of fire ships to blow up the fountain? Well, turns out this isn't the most ideal way to destroy the fountain. As you start the mission, a large cannon will start firing upon your troops. A fixed gun. Taking control of this will allow you to shoot this gun at the Fountain of Youth, eventually destroying it. Magenta will try and send his Bone Guard to dispatch your forces, and even personally show up to try and take back the cannon, but ultimately he dies and the fountain is destroyed. And so, it ends. The narrator tells the player that the Ottoman Empire is basically going to be a relic of the past, and that knighthood is going to die out. And Sahin finally leaves the story. This doesn't fix any of the prior problems, but this is my favorite part of the story. Elizabeth ditches Morgan since he wasn't able to get her the Spanish gold. Fair enough. And then the narrator asks if that water was special in the first place.
Was there something special about the fountain's water? All I know for sure is the circle would return to find out.
And there we go. The first part of this grand adventure. If there's anything I've missed, or any details that I have failed to get right, then feel free to let me know in the comments section down below. In the meantime, thanks for watching the whole thing. As of writing this, I should have more time which I can dedicate to projects like this one. If there's a different game or a different story you would like to see me go over, then feel free to let me know. I'll see what I can do. And that's it. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you later.